would be interesting.
All right, well, we want to welcome all of our friends who will be viewing this, the tens of you who will be viewing this outside of the group. This is Thursday Morning Theology on this 28th of September, and we're starting a new book today, The Prodigal God, Timothy Keller. Dr. Keller, as I have mentioned, I guess on several occasions, recently passed away. He had pancreatic cancer, made it a long time. A lot longer than pancreatic cancer victims normally with stage 4 normally make it. He was with us for a good long while, but he is most known as the pastor of Redeemer Presbyterian Church, which he planted right in the middle of downtown New York City in 1989, and it has flourished. It's a multi-campus church now. So he did some good work in a place where an evangelical church is not what you think you'd find in the middle of New York City. And yet he did it. And so if you've never seen or watched any of him, I encourage you to go to YouTube and check him out. He's very bright and love the Lord for sure. Okay, so let's begin. It gives a great definition of prodigal. I'm going to go back to the introduction, but prodigal, we often misinterpreted that word but it's recklessly extravagant, having spent everything, and we have pointed that toward the younger brother who ran off. As long as I've been alive, I've always known the story as the prodigal son. I think we can see even from the introduction that he's got a different idea about who the prodigal one is in this story. Now, a little background on Tim Keller. He's a PCA, and if you didn't know, their main offices are actually on North Brown, across from Sugarloaf Mills. They're actually not that big of a denomination, but they've had some pretty prolific writers come out, he being prominent. But the PCA is the conservative branch of the Presbyterian Church. You have PCA, which is Conservative Evangelical Reformed. You have the PCUSA. And if you have the PCUSA, you just put disciples and Episcopalians in that boat, and there you go. They are mainline liberal Protestant churches, United Methodist also as well. So just kind of thinking like that. But he's a part of the PCA. And then there's also the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, and then there's the ARP, which Glenda Garner was a member of, and Ruth Wilson's family was a member of a church over in Peachtree Corners, ARP, and it's the Associate Reformed Presbyterian Church. They're even more conservative than the PCA. So isn't that grand? You didn't ask for that, but there you go. So he's PCA, or was, but anyway. So that just kind of give you a little bit of background on him. And he did not write his first book until he was 57 years old. And it was The Reason for God, which it was really just, I haven't read it, but it's highly recommended. So anyway, so let's get into this. I'm just combing through the introduction. Did you have, Carol, you are our resident highlighter. And I hate to pick on you, but did you have anything in particular from the introduction that might spur us on to some discussion this morning?
Well, you've already mentioned this, that sometimes I hadn't thought about looking at the story, but he said it's not right to single out only one of the sons as the sole focus of the story, because growing up, all I heard about was the son who came home.
Right.
Yeah. Even Jesus doesn't call it in the parable of the prodigal son, but begins the story saying a man had two sons. The narrative is as much about the elder brother as the younger, and as much about the father as the sons. So that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. He doesn't say anything about, there was a man who had a worthless son. He sets it up. There's a man who had two sons. And we'll go into that as we go because it comes up in chapter 1. All right. Go ahead, bud.
We have a triune God. And it's kind of interesting to me that in this story, there's 3 distinct personalities.
Mhm.
And all 3 are addressed.
Mhm. They are. That's good. Anything else from the introduction? Did you have, you're the hero on the highlight.
well, the word prodigal, that you've already touched on
Okay.
that.
Yeah, the intro is not very long.
No. In the last sentence there, God's reckless grace is our greatest hope.
Yep. PCA, they love the grace. And just before that, Jesus is showing, we're on Roman numeral 20, the last page of the introduction. Jesus is showing us the God of great expenditure, who is nothing if not prodigal for us, his children. Right? The reckless grace of God. Got something? There you go. His grace is enough. That's right. She dressed for the occasion today.
I didn't know it either.
There it is.
Hey, awesome.
All right. So let's move along. Dr. Keller gives us a nice, it's based on the New International Version, and then he's got some translation in here as well. We will not take the time. Now, one thing he does here with the parable is he sets the scene by including verses 1 to 3. Okay. And he helps us to understand who it was that was attracted to Jesus, tax collectors and sinners, and then the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were muttering about this very thing, that this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. So as Dr. Keller will go on to say in this story, tax collectors and sinners are the younger brother. Pharisees and the religious, he's going to call them the religious, are the older brother. Okay. And then there's God in the middle, right? So let's go on to chapter 1. The people around Jesus, right? And this is the big point that he brings up here, is that at the very first paragraph, we call it the prodigal son. He says it misses the real message of the story. However, because there are 2 brothers, and here's the real caveat for most of us, each of whom represents a different way to be alienated from God and a different way to seek acceptance into the kingdom. All right. He gives us a little bit of history. And again, Luke recounts 2 groups of people. First of all, the tax collectors and sinners. These men and women correspond to the younger brother. They observed neither the moral laws of the Bible nor the rules for ceremonial purity followed by the religious Jews. They had it all covered. Yes, Jan?
I'm sorry, but I've got this problem with his use of the word moral,
Okay.
which just means good, whereas ethical would mean the laws. And I think he should have used the word ethical, but that's my opinion, and you don't have to agree with me.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Thank you for
Sure.
listening.
Sure. They engaged in wild living. They have left home by leaving the traditional, in the sense of they have left the traditional morality of their families and of respectable society. Okay. The second group of listeners are the Pharisees, and these are the church dudes. We would include the dudettes today, who were represented by the elder brother. They held to the traditional morality of their upbringing. They studied and obeyed the scripture. They These are elders and deacons in the church. I mean, really, and pastors. I mean, really. I mean, they are. They worshiped faithfully and prayed constantly. All right. That's, and I mentioned this last night in the lesson, and it's applicable again today. We kick Pharisees, and that word's almost dirty, but that's really not who they were. They really, really were just people who were dedicated to
I'm sorry, I should have stopped.
following the law. And they were very much wanting to bring honor and glory to God. There is an interesting Greek note here about the progressive tense. Just a little Greek will do. They used to say brill cream, a little dab will do. A little Greek will do, right? The progressive tense of the Greek verb translated were gathering conveys that the attraction of the younger brothers to Jesus was an ongoing pattern in his ministry. He seemed to attract them like flies. They were just everywhere, right? They continually flocked to him. And I think the New Testaments paint that picture. I mean, they really, really do. Who do we think Jesus was talking to in that crowd? Matthew 5, 6, and 7 in the Sermon on the Mount. Who was it that was out there? You know who? All the younger,
didn't go to church.
Younger brothers. Yeah, they seemed to, and there were some there, but they were policing it. There were some older brothers there too, and of course Rome was more than likely ever present. But what happens though when the religious people see, and this is on page 11, what happens? What's the reaction of the church dudes and dudettes?
They were kind of jealous. They never come to our services.
Yeah,
Yeah, they were angry.
Yeah.
They don't come to our church.
yeah, they
Yeah.
didn't fit in their box.
I love how he put that.
Mhm.
How dare Jesus reach out to sinners like that? They were saying, these people never come to our services. Now,
Of course, they weren't welcomed.
well, that's true. And see, and I've seen this play out. I've seen this play out in the church.
Right.
Same thing. My friend Ross Harrelson, who went to Point and was on staff at Point for a while, his dad was a preacher at a church over here on Rosebud. It was on Rosebud, the Peachcrest Christian Church in Loganville.
Oh, yeah.
He started bringing a couple of guys who played guitar, and this was years ago, but started bringing a couple of guys in there that played guitar. Their hair was a little bit long, and the church dudes ended up firing him under the pretense that he was bringing the wrong element, tax collectors and sinners, into the church.
Wow.
Yeah. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, they never come to our worship services, but Jan's right. They weren't welcome. Right. So why would they be drawn to Jesus' teaching? Dr. Keller tells us, they say, well, he's not telling them the truth. So this is the argument. Well, those big churches, they're just telling people what they want to hear. That never happened at Redeemer when Dr. Keller was there. If you haven't ever heard one of his sermons, he definitely was not telling people what they wanted to hear. Now, as Gail talked about last night, he wasn't on the other side withholding communion from them either, if they were sinful, and he thought that they needed, some repentance, right? But that's the idea. Oh, he must just be telling them what they want to hear. Yes, sir.
Some of these people that were following Jesus weren't necessarily away from the church, because they were still probably doing their sacrifices.
Oh, I'm sure they were.
And trying to follow the law and everything.
Sure.
It was the type of people that they were that the Pharisees turned off, like tax collectors. They had something to do with Rome. The people who were sick and demon possessed and had all of these maladies and stuff like that. They're not people that you want to associate with and be around because of the problems that had to be sin to cause that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Tax collectors and sinners. It's amazing the jealousies that sometimes this brings up. So To whom is Jesus teaching in this parable directed? Not always, until I heard Fred Craddock preach it. I've always heard it, it's always directed, you're lost, you're like the younger brother, you need to go home.
And that the Father will welcome you.
Yeah, so we're all younger brothers. We're all, if we haven't made that commitment, if we haven't said that prayer, if we haven't whatever, we're all lost and we need to turn around and go home. Okay.
And what I'm kind of seeing by reading this so
Yeah.
far, sort of like two guardrails for me, because I've been both in my life, the younger brother,
Yep.
and I tried to keep from becoming the older brother.
Right. But it's actually, that's good. It's to the second group, the scribes and the Pharisees. This is who he's speaking to. Because we get this idea that Jesus didn't really like them. I don't know where we get that idea from. He loves them and wants them to turn, but their hardness of heart is simply not going to allow them to. I mean, he wants them to. I mean, he's met some pretty good ones. Nick at Night. We don't know if he met Joseph of Arimathea before, obviously he died, but and Joseph buried him, so we don't know if he did.
Creepy John didn't like him.
No, John the Baptist did not like, John had a different tenor with the religious leaders. He didn't have any time for them at all. When they did come, if you remember John's words, you mother killers, you brood of vipers. That's one way, to cut the hog. But Jesus, he did woe to you. There were some woes that Jesus passed, but was never in any condemning way. It was always, he always hoped, I believe Jesus hoped right up to the very last minute that they would turn, they would change their minds. Even there with Pilate, even though he knew for sure that this was it, I'm sure there was even there that speck of he's beaten and, ecce homo, behold the man, there he is. And even there beaten and bloodied and hurting and knowing what's about to happen, I bet even then he still can't hope. The parable of the two sons takes an extended look at the soul of the elder brother and climaxes with a powerful plea for him to change his heart. Okay. All right. Throughout the centuries, when this text is taught, page 12, in church or religious education programs, as we've mentioned, the almost exclusive focus has been on how the father freely receives his penitent younger son. He said, the first time I heard the parable, I imagined Jesus' original listeners' eyes welling with tears as they heard how God will always love and welcome them, no matter what they've done. We sentimentalize this parable if we do that. The targets of this story are not wayward sinners, but religious people who do everything the Bible requires. Jesus is pleading not so much with immoral outsiders as with moral insiders. He wants to show them their blindness, narrowness, and self-righteousness, and how these things are destroying both their own souls and the lives of the people around them. It is a mistake then to think that Jesus tells this story primarily to assure younger brothers of his uncondition. I mean, I really do. Craddock preached it like that. And I went, oh, that's different. But now, Keller is no liberal. Please understand. Liberal theologically, not Tim Keller. He's very much conservative, reformed, evangelical. But I think he's onto something. That this story is directed to the people who think they're in because of what they've done. We're going to get to the big thing. I think you've already countered it. Grace. Reformed theology. Grace. This is Martin Luther. This is Paul. This is that. It is by what that you're saved? Grace. That you're saved not by works, he says, faith alone, lest any man should boast. And then we get into that argument about, well, what about good works? we'll talk about that later, but there's going to be a lot of grace. A lot of it. So his thing is, we can't be good enough. We can't do enough. And the older brother type is that way. No, the original listeners were not melted into tears by this story, but rather they were thunderstruck, offended, and infuriated. Jesus' purpose is not to warm our hearts, but to shatter our categories. Through this parable, Jesus challenges what nearly everyone has ever thought about God, sin, and salvation. His story reveals the destructive self-centeredness of the younger brother, but it also condemns the elder brother's moralistic life in the strongest terms. Jesus is saying that both the irreligious and the religious are spiritually lost. Both life paths are dead ends, and that every thought the human race has had about how to connect to God has been wrong. Talk. Anything to say about any of that?
Yes.
Is it Son's Day? Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, it's Son's Day, and they don't have a day for people who are childless. And I don't like that, but that's not what I had to say.
Gotcha.
Okay, here is the use of morals, which I have troubles with because the brother's ethical life, he is following a set of rules where morals are subservient to his ethics.
Okay.
If he was moralistic, then the ethics would be subservient to his morale or his moral values.
Okay.
And every time I ran into that, I'm sorry, I got stuck on that.
Okay.
Okay,
One of the definitions, I got a couple of definitions. You're using moral as an adjective. It's concerned with the principles of right and wrong behavior and the goodness or badness of human character. The moral dimensions of medical intervention, you could say, or something like that. Or another definition, holding or manifesting high principles for proper conduct. He prides himself on being a highly moral and ethical person. That pride, whether it be moral or ethical, is what the older brother types.
What does it say about ethical?
Well, I'm just moral.
I know,
Okay.
I noticed that.
All right, I'll be glad to look it up.
You said moral and ethical, I thought. Did you
But
say
they're
that?
not synonyms.
Yeah.
They're also not
Ethical,
synonyms.
just to give definitions here. Again, it's an adjective relating to moral principles or the branch of knowledge dealing with these. That's the definition of a medicine legally available only on a doctor's prescription and usually not advertised to the general public. Blah, blah, blah. But yeah. All right. So the moralistic life or the legal or the ethical life in the strongest terms. This is the way that we've been going about it has been wrong. All right, and then I love this next section. Carol, you're up. Why do people like Jesus but not the church?
Well, it's all good, but I did, where I first underlined was on page 16.
Okay.
He is on the side of neither the irreligious nor the religious, but he singles out religious moralism as a particularly deadly spiritual condition.
You said 16. Oh, okay, the top.
Yeah.
The end of, and if we go back to that, you poor unenlightened souls who haven't read The Lord of the Rings, I am so very sorry for you. And seeing the movies does not count. The books are so much better. So whose side is Jesus on in The Lord of the Rings when the hobbits ask the ancient Treebeard whose side he is on? He answers, I am not altogether on anybody's side because nobody is altogether on my side. But there are some things, of course, whose side I'm altogether not on. All right. So Jesus' own answer to this question, and that piggybacking off of what you read through the parable, is similar. He's not on the side of the irreligious nor the religious, but he singles out religious, religious whatever as a particularly deadly spiritual condition.
And that makes sense.
Go ahead.
the
It
whole
is hard for us to realize this today, but when Christianity
Yeah.
first arose in the world, it was not called a religion, it was the non-religion.
Yeah, we Christians were called atheists because, well, where do you go? Where do you worship? Well, you don't have a temple, right?
Mhm.
What about your priests? What about the sacrifices? And then they say, well, Jesus, he was the temple to end all temples, the priest to end all priests, and the sacrifice to end all sacrifices. So they were called atheists because they didn't do any of the things that any of the other religions did, whether good or bad. It was unique, top 17. It could not be classified with the other religions of the world. So again, going back with this parable, the parable explains why they were absolutely right to call them atheists. They were. So the irony of this should not be lost on us. Standing as we do in the midst of the modern culture wars. Okay, and this was a while back. Let me see. 2008. Gosh, I just got back home and came here. How about that? But it's still true today. To most people in our society, Christianity is religion and moralism. The only alternative to it, besides some other world religion, is pluralistic secularism. But from the beginning, it was not so. Christianity was recognized as a tertium quid. And then he defines it for those. I know y'all are like, what is that? Something else entirely. Okay? And here's the crucial point. In general, he says, religiously observant people were offended by Jesus, but those estranged from religious and moral observance were intrigued and attracted to him. We see this throughout the New Testament accounts of Jesus' life. And then he goes through examples. In every case where Jesus meets a religious person and a sexual outcast, or a racial outcast, or a political outcast, the outcast is the one who connects with Jesus, and the elder brother type doesn't, every time. Okay? Jesus says to the respectable religious leaders, oh, the tax collectors and the prostitutes entered the kingdom before you. He didn't say that they wouldn't enter the kingdom. He just said preference or place will be given to the younger brother types. Is it any wonder that they killed him? I mean, is it any wonder?
Yeah.
I'm reminded of a story, and I think I may have shared this in a sermon or maybe in a lesson. Two groups of Jewish students were at the Wailing Wall, and they were fighting over exactly when the Sabbath begins. One of them said it was when the morning star, Venus, appears in the sky, and the other one said it is the moment when the sun goes down. And the tourist was there overhearing it, and it got so violent, they started hitting each other, and they started wrestling with each other there at the Wailing Wall. And this lady walked up to the tourist and said, "Are you from America?" He said, "Well, yes, I am." Said, "You don't happen to be a Christian, do you?" He said, "Well, yes, I am a Christian as well." And the lady said, "Well, you can see now how Jesus of Nazareth didn't stand a chance in this town." I mean, it's crazy, but it's true. But he didn't say they wouldn't be in the kingdom. See, that's one of the things to remember for me. He didn't say the older brother wasn't, because the father, and we're going to read about this later in another chapter, the father doesn't say, well, you ungrateful, but we'll get there. Okay, you've read it before. You know what he says to him. He behaves toward the older brother in the exact same way he behaves toward the younger son. He goes out to him, and he opens his arms, and he pleads with him, welcomes him. The results are different, but I want to believe that the elder brother finally went to the party. I do. But we'll get to that in a moment. All right. Anything else in those last couple of paragraphs there?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Carol.
Jesus' teaching consistently attracted the irreligious while offending the Bible-believing religious people of his day. However, in the main, our churches today do not have this effect.
Preach.
The kind of outsiders Jesus attracted are not attracted to contemporary churches, even our most avant-garde ones. We tend to draw conservative, buttoned-down, moralistic people. The licentious and liberated, or the broken and marginal avoid church.
For the most part.
That can only mean one thing. If the preaching of our ministers and the practice of our parishioners do not have the same effect on people that Jesus had, then we must not be declaring the same message that Jesus did.
Rock and roll. If our churches aren't appealing to younger brothers, they must be more full of elder brothers than we'd like to be. And I can't argue with that. And when he says contemporary churches, he just means today. He's not talking about
Right.
worship style or whether you meet in a warehouse or a bungalow or our building. He's just saying just contemporary expressions of church. So Dr. Keller just wanted to get through to us the two different groups of people who are there, because it's important for us to get our minds straight on who it was that was there. Luke thought it was so important, at the very beginning of the chapter, and there are two other parables in this, but of course they were merely leading up to. We start with a sheep, a coin, and then Jesus hits the third point and the tale of the two sons. So next week we'll look at the brothers in more detail. Yeah, go ahead, man.
The thing about the parable of the prodigal son, him bringing up the older brother. And that's the first time I've heard it brought up in that way, but when you get thinking about it, the church is always focused on the sinner, bringing the sinner to Christ.
Right.
They didn't look at the older brother as being like they were. It's easier to look at somebody else and look at yourself and say, this is where I screwed up.
Yes, sir. It's a discipleship crisis is what it is. The older brother has not been discipled. He views himself as a servant. He says it himself when the father goes out to him. I have served you.
But when the younger brother asked for his inheritance,
Yes,
essentially saying, Dad, I wish you were dead.
indeed.
And the father divided the inheritance as it would have been properly divided.
Yes.
Who is the elder brother serving? He's already got his inheritance. The
That's true.
farm is his.
Pretty much. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's something for us to think about as we go forward. Yeah, he's going to talk about it. But he's mad at his dad. Ultimately, I think Jesus uncovers the deep-seated Jonah in all of us, that we like being God's chosen. I was singing, I can't help it, songs just come into my head. And for some reason, I don't know why, Carol, but when we left home, so glad you're getting your phone back.
Me too.
You didn't know about that.
I'm
But,
glad I'm getting it back
yeah.
as well.
I started singing the Veggie Tales Jonah song when Jonah gets the mandate from God to go to Nineveh. And it's Archibald Asparagus that plays Jonah, household name. And Archibald has a British accent. He also plays Alfred in Larry Boy, who's kind of like Batman. But he sings this beautiful song, and it starts off with, no, this cannot be. Your messages are meant for me and my brothers. We are your chosen people. And Nineveh, well, they're not. And then he starts talking about all the places in Israel. He'll go, fine, I'll go here, I'll go there, I'll go here, I'll go there. But Nineveh, no. Nineveh is where I draw the line. And then at the very end of the song, before he goes to sleep, he says, no, this cannot be. Your messages are meant for me all of a sudden, even his brothers are out. So there's this closing in of Jonah against those that are outside. And I think that's one of the things that the church has done. I think it's the failure of discipleship, because if we were being discipled, we would be more attractive to. You want to see younger brothers? They're not all going to be younger brothers. You want to see some younger brothers here? I don't know their faiths, but there'll be some at Scouts. There'll be some at the fall festival. Pray we don't miss the opportunities to just, not to grow. If we grow, great. But I pray that we'll make sure we're always like Christ.
Some of the parallels that I'm
Yeah, go ahead.
listening to this and seeing a new light on the prodigal son
Mhm.
brings the parable of the log in the eye.
Yes. Yes, yes. We're supposed to clear ours out,
Before we start, yeah.
but then we can, and it was last night, it was last night's lesson. Jesus is standing there right in front of them at the Feast of Tabernacles. God is standing right there in front of the religious authorities. They didn't see him. They missed him. All right. I think that's it.
It was very good.
Well, thank y'all.
Mhm.
Chapter 2 for next week.
Okay.
This book is not too heavy. Yeah. So it's kind of like Goldilocks porridge. Is that right?
It's not too
I don't
heavy, but
know.
it's deep.
You don't know the story of the three?
I know
Three
the three
bears.
bears,
This
but
is
when you ask
2000.
about being like Goldilocks's porridge.
Well, oh, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Am I mixing stories? It's like the baby bear's porridge. It's not too hot, it's not too cold,
It's just right.
well, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't, I'm not making fun
I'm
of you.
sorry.
I'm not making
She was
fun of
trying
you
to
at all.
This is gonna be on the recording for everybody to hear.
I was
James
not,
is mixing metaphors again. So anyway, everybody take care. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe, all three of you. See ya. Bye-bye.